I am.
I've got a thing that says that you're in Wellington, but you mentioned your neighbourhood Facebook group.
Yeah, we live some of the time in Wellington, some of the time in Auckland, but when we live here in Auckland, we lived in Onehunga, and I really enjoy it. God, it's been hot here today for anybody that's been interested in Auckland weather.
That's a plus. Thank you very much, and thanks to producer Emma Hurley. Ka hoki mai a popo. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us and for all your texts and feedback. Really, really appreciate it. And Lisa Owen with Checkpoint is next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. The search has widened as rescuers refuse to give up hope for a dad and his 3 kids missing along a rugged coastline. 6 rugby players get sent back to Auckland after skipping out of the lockdown zone. Plus, a truckie's got the virus. Health authorities are tracking his movements through the Motu. The vaccine rollout is really rolling out like on wheels. The jab goes on the road. A Franz Joseph business owner says he'll struggle to pay staff this month with no international or Auckland visitors and profits 84% down. The only mass Auckland gathering that won't prompt a police visit, and quarantine is doing a roaring trade at Auckland Zoo. You can watch us on Sky Channel 83.
Ahi Mari, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. 3 agencies have launched a coordinated investigation of the events preceding the Lynmore stabbings. The way Ahmed Samsudeen was managed in custody and in the 7 weeks leading up to the attack will be examined by the Independent Police Conduct Authority, the Office of the Inspectorate at the Department of Corrections and Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. Katie Dodd reports.
The review will investigate if the police, corrections and the Security Intelligence Service did enough to assess the risk that Samsudeen posed and if they did enough to respond to that risk. It won't look at what happened before he was in custody or any immigration-related decisions. There's already a separate review underway into the decision to shoot Samsudeen. The coordinated review is due for completion next March.
Police are expanding the coastline search for a missing King Country man and his 3 children, asking the public for sightings of the family. Surf lifesavers using inflatable boats and jet skis have been scouring the coastline inaccessible to land searchers for Thomas Phillips and his 3 young children. Sergeant Sean Keeley is leading the operation and says it covers a large portion of the craggy west coast.
Far north is Taharoa, and as far south as it's about 15 nautical miles south from here.
Inspector Will Loughran says police are carrying out a parallel investigation to the search.
Bank inquiries, phone inquiries, we're speaking to family, friends, associates, anyone that knows Tom, the kids and the family. That allows us to build a really clear background and build up a profile of the family, which also informs our search and where possible locations could be.
So far, the police say they haven't found any signs indicating the family went inland. A truck driver who travels outside the Auckland boundary for work has tested positive for COVID-19. The driver returned the positive result after isolating as a household contact of another case. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The Director General of Health says the driver travelled to Hamilton, Cambridge and Tauranga. However, Dr Ashley Bloomfield says it's not yet known if they were infectious at the time, as discussions with them are continuing. The driver delivered food to supermarkets, and any locations of interest that are identified will be put online. The Prime Minister says this case demonstrates why it is important to have other parts of the country at level 2, while Auckland is at a higher alert level.
13 new community cases were recorded today, all in Tāmaki Makaurau. The Mayor, Phil Goff, wants at least 80% of Aucklanders to have had at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine within the week. The first mobile buses delivering vaccinations to Aucklanders started work today at Pukekohe, Papakura and Henderson. New Zealand Rugby have admonished the provincial unions that made errors in their application for COVID travel exemptions for their players. 6 players who travelled separately from Auckland to Wellington, Hawke's Bay, Manawatu, Bay of Plenty and Northland to join their NPC sides have now been sent back. NZR Chief Executive Mark Robinson stresses the players were not to blame. He says the situation could have been avoided had the unions first spoken to NZR.
We understand this is an unfortunate situation, but we've nevertheless communicated that that we have really high expectations around this in terms of continuing to work with the government.
Mark Robertson says the travel breaches will not stop the NPC going ahead. If you go down to Auckland's Cockle Bay today, you're sure of a big surprise, for every teddy bear that there ever was is providing locals with something to smile about during lockdown. The bears and their friends, often dozens of them, sometimes play on a tractor, go tramping, do baking or just watch TV. The creator of the displays, Susan Mudford, says it's challenging coming up with different ideas every day, but she enjoys seeing people's faces when they realise what the bears are up to. It's 4 minutes past 5. Moving now into sports news. Damien McKenzie will make his first test start in 3 years at first 5 for the All Blacks against Argentina in Brisbane on Saturday night. Coach Ian Foster has completely overhauled the side that beat the Pumas 39-0 on Sunday, making 11 changes. The forward pack has been completely changed, with Adi Savea returning to captain the side. Having only just appointed a new captain and vice-captain, Silver Ferns coach Dame Nolene Taurua faces the prospect of having to replace them before they've even taken to the court. The Silver Ferns have assembled in Christchurch today to prepare for next week's 3-test series against England, but Captain Gina Crampton, Vice-Captain Sulu Fitzpatrick, Peter Toiava and Grayson Wiki all remain in lockdown in Auckland. Taurua has called in 3 development squad players as cover, but now faces a dilemma over potential leadership changes.
That's probably the step that I haven't actually gone to in my head as yet. And when it gets closer to the test match, or we have to go into the position of reappointing a captain and vice-captain, we will. But also hoping on the offset as well, off chance that, the Auckland crew can join us.
And finally, last season's runners-up Manchester City have crushed German club Leipzig 6-3 to kick off their new Champions League campaign. Liverpool beat AC Milan 3-2 and Paris Saint-Germain drew 1-1 with Club Brugge. And that's the news.
Climate plans not taking flight.
And I think it is just staggering. Agencies who are responsible for the bones of the plan around this have not front-footed this.
Travelling on cleaner planes.
The use of hydrogen on the aircraft, driving a motor which effectively is electric, powering the aircraft.
And a trip that's out of this world.
Sometimes you feel like the best parts of your life have passed you by, but that's not the case. There's so much life still worth living.
Pushing the Frontier. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now for the short forecast from mid-service to midnight Rāmere Friday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy with thunderstorms, clearing around midday tomorrow. Downpours possible for Auckland and Waikato this evening. Waitomo to Manawatu, including the central high country and Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, possibly heavy, clearing late tomorrow morning. Thunderstorms possible about Western Bay of Plenty tonight. Strong or gale southeasterlies, easing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, easing late tomorrow. Strong or gale southeasterlies tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, rain possibly heavy for Wairarapa, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Southeast gales easing tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine with a few showers in Fiordland, Buller and Marlborough Sounds. Southeast gales about the Sounds, easing later tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland will see occasional showers, clearing later tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi mō te rā, Sarah. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, the 6 rugby players who skipped across the Auckland border to join their NPC teams in 5 different regions. And in breaking news, the 4 Auckland-based Silver Ferns have just been granted an exemption to travel to Christchurch for next week's match against England. Plus, an Auckland truck driver who visited Cambridge, Hamilton and Tauranga has tested positive for COVID-19. We'll speak to Associate Health Minister Ayesha Verrall shortly. But first, police are looking at the phone and bank records of missing King Country man Thomas Phillips as the search for him and his 3 children continues. The family's not been seen since Saturday night, and today the search focus turned to the sea. Surf lifesavers used inflatable boats and a jet ski, and they've been out searching the rugged coastline that is inaccessible to land searchers. Andrew McRae was there.
There's still no sign of the missing family after 4 days of intensive searching. Inspector Will Lochran says it's been challenging from the start.
We're in a remote, isolated area. Communications are hard. The weather hasn't been favourable. But again, I think it's a credit to everyone involved in the search that hasn't held them back at all, and they've continued on through some pretty harsh weather conditions.
Sergeant Sean Keeley, who is heading the search operation, says the area covers a large portion of the King Country west coast from Taharoa in the north to about 15 nautical miles south of Maricopa. He describes the sea search as dynamic and forever changing.
We do have to go over that all the time because as the tides come in and out, our scene changes. Also in terms of the size of the search area, because it is dynamic, our search area continuously expands.
He says land searchers have come up with nothing.
We haven't found any clues in sign cutting or tracking that would indicate that Thomas and the children have been through the areas that we've searched.
Inspector Lochran says police are keeping an open mind about what has happened to Mr Phillips and his children.
We're exploring all viable scenarios.
So you're not ruling out foul play?
Again, at this stage, there's no indication of foul play.
Detectives are running an investigation parallel to the search, working on the family's movements. Inspector Lochran describes it as wide-ranging.
Bank inquiries, phone inquiries, we're speaking to family, friends, associates, anyone that knows Tom, the kids and the family. That allows us to build a really clear background and build up a profile of the family, which also informs our search and where possible locations could be.
A childhood friend of Thomas Phillips says he would be surprised if they had been swept out to sea. Murray Carthana says Mr Phillips knew the sea conditions well.
That day, she was pretty rough, very rough, I would say. A day that you wouldn't want to be down the beach. Tongaro is the Māori word for the sea for us, and he works in many ways. It's up to him to give them back to us if they're out there. There's a few of our aunties and uncles that are out there every morning doing karakias for them.
He describes Tom Phillips as a happy-go-lucky guy and his kids as chirpy, happy and well. Sergeant Sean Keeley says not ever being able to find the family is a possibility, but not one being explored at this stage.
We're optimistic, holding out hope like the family, that we've put a lot of resources into, and we will continue to find Tom and the kids, and you would have seen that from staff on the ground, helicopters, drones, planes. We've put everything into the search to find this family.
Inspector Will Lochran says the search is being regularly reassessed, but he says they're not yet at the point where everywhere possible has been searched.
Well, let's go now live to Otarahanga to our reporter Jake McKee. Jake, it's been 4 days and searchers haven't found anything of note, so where do they go from here?
Yes, Lisa. Well, whilst it's been 4 days, tonight will mark 6 nights since Tom and his children were last seen. Going into tomorrow, we are going to start seeing some of these teams change around. The surf lifesavers and land and search rescue teams, these are volunteers that they're here on their own time. So we're going to start seeing some of those teams be replenished. Police have also talked about the work that they need to do to replenish their own staff. Some of them have been here since Monday, and it is going to start becoming tiring for them, and they need to be refreshed out. And now, police told us today they are essentially still at square one. They don't know anywhere where they could be. There is no sign of Tom and the children yet. Land and search rescue teams, they haven't been able to find any signs of foot tracks or anything up in the bush. So while we say that the search is on the coastline, that is very much at the moment both still the bush and the sea in the Kiritihere and Maricopa beach areas.
And what's the weather looking like tomorrow?
Well, at the moment, the rain has truly set in this afternoon, which can't have made things easier at all. When we were out there this afternoon, the rains really started to come in and it became really, really blustery. Here in Otorohanga, it's only set in and we are getting fog everywhere. This is expected to stay in the area through to tomorrow morning, except we are hoping to see this ease out, and winds and rain is supposed to ease through until tomorrow afternoon, which everyone is hopeful will help the searches go ahead a lot more. Surf Life Saving's very aware that if things don't improve, that could hamper their efforts here. They can't get the boats out in the water easy. As soon as there's swells, it makes it very difficult for them to be looking through the water. They're hoping for flat conditions so they can actually see through the water. As soon as there's a wave, those white waters make things very difficult for them.
Thanks for the update, Jake. That is Jake McKee, who is in Otorohanga. It is almost 14 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai. E haere ake nei, coming up, Dr. Ayesha Verrall, Associate Health Minister and Minister for Seniors, joins us live. New Zealand rugby top brass has ordered a please explain from several unions who let players travel out of Auckland to 5 other regions. The players were given exemptions to head to their NPC teams and travelled in the last 6 to 10 days. They've all been told to go home, and the NZR boss says he's been blindsided. Clay Wilson reports.
The 6 players headed from Auckland to their NPC teams in Wellington, Hawke's Bay, Manawatu, Bay of Plenty and Northland. With them were travel exemptions to be able to get out of level 4 lockdown in Auckland. New Zealand Rugby says errors were discovered in the online exemption applications made by the 5 unions. CEO Mark Robinson says NZR was completely unaware the applications had been made and stepped in on Monday when they learned there was a problem. He says the specific details of the errors is a question for the unions, but is clear he's not happy they weren't consulted.
We've certainly communicated back to our provincial unions, both in various calls and more formally in writing, that this is a critical time for our country and that we have worked really, really hard with government and all the associated agencies to be absolutely committed to all the health protocols associated with COVID at the moment.
4 of the players have received both their COVID-19 vaccination shots, while the other 2 have received their first one. 5 of the 6 players have also tested negative for COVID in the past 10 days. The other player is in the process of being tested, but has tested negative in the past and is double vaccinated. Robinson says, based on what he understands, there's no concern any of the players have contracted or spread the virus. And he's stressing the unions, not the players, are to blame.
The provincial unions made the applications. We were not consulted on that or involved. And from what I understand, the provincial unions each made an error during the online process associated with that. So when we realised there was an error, we front-footed that with the government.
Robinson says their focus now is on fully resolving the situation, but he is apologising for the mistakes.
We're incredibly, disappointed and frustrated that, we're in this position, and we recognise that it's an incredibly, unfortunate situation. Since we were made aware of this late on Monday, talked to all of the necessary agencies as soon as possible, been very open and transparent with all of them and shared all the information we had and looked to take guidance on the way to, remedy the situation. So certainly on behalf of the game, regret that it's happened.
5 unions with some questions to answer about how the players were allowed to cross the border.
The vaccine rollout has hit the road in Auckland, with buses brought in to bolster the jab drive in the COVID outbreak epicentre. 3 buses were unveiled today and dispatched to Pukekohe, Papakura and Henderson to deliver the Pfizer shot. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Kia ora Ranui, kia ora Ranui. It's your boys TJ and Prince from Te Whanau Pareda. Come on down to the Western Park Village where you can get a vaccination. It's free, it's on us guys. So come on down to the Western Park Village where you can get your vaccination.
5 weeks into level 4 lockdown, and residents of West Auckland's Western Park Village are finally getting their first Pfizer shot. They're less Mr Whippy, more mobile library, but these vaccine buses are at long last rolling around Tamaki Makaurau, Shot bro, they're called, and a shot in the arm is what they're delivering.
I'm standing at Western Park Village in Ranui. Now, this is one of the first of 3 stops on day 1 of those new vaccination buses. There's a number of people lining up behind me waiting to be vaccinated, and many of them say without this, they wouldn't have been able to get a shot at all.
For one, I didn't even know where around here to get my first shot. And for 2, it's quite hard for other people on the benefit to go outside of their area to look for shots.
So a bit of a bonus is here because I've got no transport to get anywhere.
So if Delta gets into this camp, it'll go from one cabin to the next very quickly.
The bus pulls up and a line to get a vaccine slowly swells. Masks are handed out because some people here don't even have those. No one's allowed on the bus because we're still in lockdown here. Instead, residents and neighbours sit spaced apart in the village's car park, while a hive of medical staff draw up shots on board. Nearly everyone appears to be getting their first dose, months after the vaccine rollout started.
These people live off the grid. And they're the ones that are, one, most vulnerable, but also because of where they move, they can be super spreaders.
Waipareira Trust Chief Executive John Tamahere says some here today are among the city's worst off, yet they're only just being reached.
Everyone in the caravan park, just because they're down on their luck doesn't mean to say they're bad people. Yeah, but they deserve to be reached out to.
He says things like vaccination buses, ways of getting into those hard-to-reach spots, have been needed for several months.
Oh yeah, deeply frustrating. And you run into layer after layer of bureaucracy.
Auckland has been through several lockdowns. The latest has just ticked into week 5, with who knows how many to go. So why weren't the buses on the road earlier? I put that to Northern Region Health Coordination Centre Vaccination Programme Director Matt Hannant during this morning's launch. This was his response.
Look, this was always part of the campaign, and I think it's about how we have responded to what the community needed. We had an alert level lockdown. We were working on these before then. We then needed to surge our capacity, and we're really pleased. We're doing 26,000 vaccinations per day. We've got capacity in the system to do 220,000 vaccinations. We've got over 200 pharmacies and GPs, primary cares up and running. So this is just another way of making it as easy as possible and responding to what the community needs.
Just 3 of 12 buses were rolled out today. Matt Hannant says that's because people need to be trained and procedures need to be written up. Meanwhile, Minister for Māori Development, Willie Jackson, says the government is looking at other ideas to get to those hard-to-reach spots. So, what are they?
We're on Zooms every day and night now, working through our next steps in terms of these strategies, because the reality, particularly with Māori, we're a bit behind, and we can't afford to get caught behind, because you would have heard Minister Little talking about a 90% vaccination rate, and we're, I think, about 12% behind Pākehā at the moment in terms of vaccination.
Back at Ranui, some Western Park locals have a suggestion.
There seems to be a push at the end to get lockdown 4, to get as many people vaccinated as possible, so we get lockdown 3 next week. I think it should be on a continuum.
Finally, the buses have arrived, taking the vaccines to the people, making sure everyone in the city is protected from the virus, and then maybe help avoid more lockdowns.
And if you were listening to that on radio, that piece from our two Nicks will go up on our Facebook page. It is 22 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A truck driver who crosses the Auckland border is among today's new COVID cases. There's 13 today, all of them in Auckland, bringing the total to this outbreak to 996. And there's also a mystery case, a patient at Middlemore Hospital's ED who showed no symptoms but was swabbed as part of surveillance testing. The truck driver who delivers supermarket supplies, has driven to Cambridge, Hamilton and Tauranga. Ko taku manuhiri nai nei, ko Dr Ayesha Verrall, the government spokesperson today on COVID issues. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
What can you tell us about the truck driver?
Yeah, I don't have an update beyond what was shared at the 1 p.m. update, and you relayed that all in your introduction there. I do know that the interview with the truck driver has concluded. So if there are any locations of interest to come from that, I imagine they'll be through soon. But of course there might not be, because people who leave alert level 4 are advised to take their alert level with them.
So the trips, Cambridge, Tauranga, Hamilton, was that one trip or multiple trips?
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have any other information. We do need to let the team, as they do their investigation, get on with their work, so I haven't heard any further details from that investigation.
It was said today that the driver was isolating as he was a contact of a case. So when was that case identified and when was he told he was a contact?
Yeah, I think that is that is precisely the sort of information we'll get as the investigation is concluded.
So are they in the same household as in the COVID case that was his close contact and presumably where he's caught the virus? Do they live in the same household?
Yeah, Lisa, we get our updates on the cases daily, and so in between times we do need to let the team get on with the work of doing the investigation. The questions you're asking are precisely what they'll be asking. We'll be able to provide further information on that tomorrow.
Right, okay. Well, let's move on then to pensioners stuck in Australia due to the COVID outbreak and the bursting bubble there. There's a lot of pensioners who are pretty stressed out. Some of them have health issues and they're staring down the barrel of their pensions being suspended. Now, you're their minister as well as being the COVID spokesperson today. What should happen with them?
Yeah, well, firstly, I understand that it is a stressful situation to be in. I have received a little bit of correspondence on this issue, and officials estimate that it affects a few dozen people. And the situation with the law for superannuation is it can only be paid to people overseas for 7 months. So you can imagine if someone went in the Trans-Tasman bubble about mid-October, that could be an issue for them. One of the things about the law is that the legal advice that we've received is that additional payments to people beyond that 7 months is only possible if it's not reasonably foreseeable. If the reason that they're overseas or stuck overseas is not reasonably foreseeable, and we're advised that wouldn't apply to the Trans-Tasman bubble.
Why, Minister? Because I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a couple of things here. If you think that there's only about a couple of dozen of them, then it wouldn't cost you that much to keep paying them their pension. And the second thing is that clause that you've read out, well, it seems subjective. If you couldn't reasonably foresee this, they may have been able to foresee a slight interruption, but the one that they are now facing, which is weeks and weeks with no solid prospects of return and the government freezing MIQ after they got stuck there. I mean, really, is that reasonable that they could have anticipated what appears to be a perfect storm?
I think the question about what's reasonably foreseeable is indeed one that we can work through. And you would have heard the Minister of Finance say that for people whose situation is really beyond their control, we are interested in continuing to see what can be done for them.
So what should they do and who should they contact and what do they need to provide?
So I think this is a process that the Minister for Social Development is continuing to look at. But I think there's a couple of things that they can do. The first thing is that there is, in addition to the initial green zone flights that were on when the Trans-Tasman bubble was closed, you'll recall there was a week of green zone flights. There are ongoing red zone flights. And the next tranche of MIQ vouchers to be released will include Australia. So it's still that way. Then there's the MIQ.
What
exemption.
date for those ministers? The release of the Australia vouchers.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a date for that. There is another avenue, though, listeners will want to know about, which is that there is an exceptional, I think it's emergency allocation of MIQ that you can apply for. And while this on its own wouldn't be grounds for that, this in combination with other factors that may reflect hardship could be taken into account. So people in that position could apply for for an MIT exemption in that way. And then, as I said, it remains an area the government continues to look at, with the Minister of Social Development being the lead minister there.
So are you advocating for them?
I continue to talk to both the Minister of Social Development and Minister for COVID response about this issue.
On the subject of these 6 NPC rugby players that have moved around the country, there was apparently an error, as it's being described by New Zealand Rugby, relating to their applications for travel exemptions. What can you tell us about that? What was the mistake?
Look, I am not aware of that issue, but I do know the Minister for Sport is aware of it. So I'm sorry, I can't give you any other information. I just heard that Minister Robertson was dealing with that.
And just briefly before you go, do you support mandatory vaccination for health workers?
Look, mandatory vaccination is a big step. I'm very clear that vaccination is an important responsibility because it does protect not only the individual but their patients as well. I'm really heartened by the steps the profession is taking to advocate vaccination to their members, and I'm watching that really closely.
Thank you for your time this evening. That's Dr. Ayesha Verrall, the Associate Health Minister. Homai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Like to hear from you on the issue of the pensioners there, and the Minister saying there could be some exceptions made with that subjective clause in the legislation. What do you reckon should happen? Get in touch, pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Also interested if you went out and had your vaccination at one of the buses today. Get in touch. An Auckland family's front yard has become something to admire from afar for people out on their state-mandated trot around the block. Teddy bears, big and small, are on display every day, come rain or shine. Our reporter Chen Yul went to check it out.
It's a rainy day in the East Auckland suburb of Coco Bay. Today, the Bear family and friends, roughly 30 of them, are in their pyjamas, lying or sitting around a bed, reading.
After the level 4 announcement that we're going to be here a bit longer, they just want to stay in bed today. So they're just having a stay in bed and read book day.
That's Susan Martford, the mastermind of this gathering, one that is allowed under level 4 restrictions. She started the displays in March last year when the country went into its first lockdown. Ms. Martford says it was prompted by a teddy in a house window across the road.
We put big ted up on the deck looking out, and then each day I just added a teddy or a toy until we got up to, I think we got up to about 49 in that first lockdown or something like that, and it just grew.
The bears were originally gifts to her children, now grown up, and Ms. Martford made some of them too. Once a passerby donated 3 big and medium-sized bears after seeing the displays. As a school teacher, Ms. Martford gets the show ready before teaching online each day. The group hide under the roof on rainy days and are on the lawn when it's good weather.
Normally they're up there playing on the tractor or going tramping or mowing the lawns or doing roadworks or up the power pole fixing the internet. They've done a bit of skiing and snowboarding, a bit of scuba diving, all sorts of different things.
She says all she wants to do is put a smile on people's faces.
I work up there, and when the children come past and some of the grown-ups even, you can hear them laughing, and that's just really cool to hear that people are reasonably happy.
Neighbours say everyone loves them, and some even take photos to share with their families.
It's good, it's uplifting. It's warming, yeah, and it's good to see something different every day.
We walk past here quite a bit, so my daughter loves it. She said when we walk past before, she knows exactly the house that the bears are at.
It's nice. Before, in the first lockdown, there was a lot of them everywhere, but I haven't seen too many this time, but this one is back again. And it's always good, it's always interesting, and it put a lot of effort into it too, you know. It's not a little thing. Sometimes they got 10 or 20 bears.
Susan Martford's husband, Stuart, is a big helping hand. He says his wife gets up early to stage the day's display.
It's good to see the joy that the community get from it. And even when I'm working outside, people go past and say how much they enjoy it.
Susan Martford says once the city goes to alert level 3, the teddies will start their appeal for donations for the local food bank. Last time around prompted generous help.
And if you were listening to Chen Liu's piece on radio, do go online and check out the pictures. They're gorgeous. Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei i a checkpoint. We're with families recovering from COVID-19 as they leave MIQ. And the Trojan horse called Judy that's being used to catch feral dogs. And we'll have more on pensioners stranded across the ditch. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Don't forget you can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko Sarah Arnold tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government is still investigating whether a truck driver who crosses the Auckland border was infectious when they made deliveries to supermarkets in Cambridge, Hamilton and Tauranga. The driver is among 13 new COVID-19 cases, all in Tāmaki Makaurau, reported today. The Associate Health Minister, Ayesha Verrall, has told Checkpoint that officials are still trying to piece together the driver's movements. The driver tested positive after isolating as a household contact of another case. And in news just in, 4 Auckland-based Silver Fern players have been given an exemption to travel to Christchurch for next week's series against England. Captain Gina Crampton, Vice-Captain Sulu Fitzpatrick, Peta Toiava and Grace Nweke will join the squad ahead of Monday's game. The 4 players have tested negative for COVID-19. A coordinated investigation of the events preceding the Linmore stabbings has been launched and will look at whether the police, corrections and the NZSIS did enough to assess the risk that Ahmed Samsudeen posed. It will also look at the agencies did enough to respond to that risk and how he was managed in custody. A separate review is already underway into his shooting. The coastline search for a missing man and his 3 young children is being expanded. Police are also asking the public for sightings of the family who have not been seen since Saturday. Sergeant Sean Keeley says the search covers a large portion of the craggy west coast. Surf lifesavers using inflatable boats and jet skis have been scouring the coastline inaccessible to land searchers for Thomas Phillips and his children. And finally, the woman found dead in the South Auckland suburb of Manurewa over the weekend was 16 years old. A homicide investigation was launched on Monday after the body was discovered on Saturday. She has been identified and her family notified. Police say releasing too much information at this stage could jeopardise the investigation. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Kia ora rā, e hoa nau mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa inai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who is here to talk about business. Nona, the economy's been running much hotter than expectations, but, you know, that was before the current lockdown, so how are the numbers looking?
Yeah, so in the June quarter, so they're historic numbers. We're here, it's in September already, but in the June quarter, the economy expanded by 2.8%. Which is roughly twice what the financial markets were expecting. And think about this, the Reserve Bank was only picking it to grow by 0.7%. So 2.8% in a quarter is huge. And that translates to something like 5.1% as an annual inflation number. Big numbers for sure, but that's not expected to be repeated in the September quarter. The expectations are that we're going to see quite a hit because of the lockdown, so a drop of 7.8% is anticipated, and then a rebound in the fourth quarter. That's the last 3 months of the year. So it'll be interesting times. What you can make from these numbers is that there was a lot of growth, export dollars earned, and that was primarily because of the tourists that arrived from Australia. And of course, they're not here either.
Nona, well, I suppose in the good news section, maybe for business, there's been a sharp increase in aluminium prices, which could change the outlook for TY Point smelter. How so? Yeah, so Forsyth Bar has done some interesting research here, and so aluminium prices were US $1,500 a ton in March 2020. So now they've soared to $4,000, that's New Zealand dollars a ton, and that's the highest price they've been above that 4,000 mark since 2008. And Forsyth Bar says the prices are so high and likely to remain high, and that's probably, well,
partly because China has decided to cap aluminium production for environmental reasons, and that reinforces the view that Tiwai could remain open beyond 2024, also for environmental reasons. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops, but certainly there'll have to be some negotiation because the electricity deal that's in place would not extend beyond 2024. So the owner of the smelter would have to renegotiate with Meridian Energy and I guess its partners.
And what numbers have you got for us from the market today?
Look, just a slight drop of 20 points. So that's pretty good because the rest of the Asian market's looking a little bit sick anyhow. That was to 13,080. The New Zealand dollar is just at 71.1 US cents. It jumped a little bit on those GDP numbers, but it all kind of came back to where it started once people realized the September numbers weren't going to be that great. So 97.1 Australian and 51.4 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business. Franz Joseph business owners say they're struggling to keep their heads above water after losing Aucklanders and international visitors. The winters are traditionally quiet, but businesses say they've always had a rainy day kitty to keep them going after a fruitful peak season. That is all but dried up for many after 3 disrupted summers of flooding, bridge washouts and now COVID. Tess Brunton and cameraman Nathan McKinnon are in Franz Joseph and filed this report.
Camper vans are becoming a rare sight on the main street of Franz Joseph these days. Westland District Councillor and local businessman Ian Hartshaw isn't sure if people are aware of how bad the situation is on the ground. He says their town and the surrounding glacier country relies on tourism and have been pushed to embrace it by previous governments and not to diversify. Now several businesses are left teetering on the edge.
You know, if you're a dairy farmer and they said you couldn't export milk, what would they do? You know, and that's exactly what's happened here in the reverse. We've got no cash flow coming in. So at the end of the day, this is going to be a crunch time and it's going to be a hell of a mess.
His company, Franz Hiring Contracting, is preparing a road for new commercial sections as part of the government's shovel-ready scheme. Without that, he says, he'd start looking at taking his business somewhere else. He's grateful for the New Zealanders who visited, but says it's not enough to keep closures at bay.
If we don't get open this summer, there's going to be a lot of businesses that will fold and just move on.
Just to clarify, when you say open for summer, what do you mean?
The borders, yeah. To get the borders open, to get the Australians in.
Franz Joseph is a resilient community, but Mr Hartshaw says the true extent of the hardship is often hidden behind brave faces, and people are leaving.
You know, it becomes the fire brigade and all that gets on the blink because they haven't got enough staff, you know, and for a call out. So it's everything just goes down the line. It started at the front where you sell a tourist trip or something like that, but it's down to the plumbers, the builders, it's everybody.
Adam Hoare owns the Bella Vista Franz Joseph and Waiho Hot Tubs and is a partner at Snakebite Brewery. Cancellations are still rolling in and he isn't seeing many forward bookings. Instead, he's speaking with his business partners, landlords and banks to see what more they can offer or whether closures are on the cards.
We're feeling pretty exposed and vulnerable. The feeling around town is quite raw. We accept and understand and support the concept of the closed borders, and we accept the position we're in as far as getting through it together. However, we feel as if we're taking more than our share of the burden.
He says it would help if businesses could claim back some of the many tax dollars paid over the years and encourages more New Zealanders to explore the West Coast. Heli Services Chief Executive Grant White says they were holding on before the latest lockdown, but now they're going downhill.
For August we were 45% down on August of last year, and September of this year we were 84% down. So far this month, and we're halfway through the month already, so at the moment we're kind of struggle to make enough money to pay wages for the month.
The Civil Aviation Authority has been keeping a close eye on helicopter companies to ensure they can cover safety and maintenance costs. The wage subsidy has helped, but it can only do so much, and the bills keep coming.
We've gone out and borrowed money to actually keep going. We could see that, there was no short end to this. So yeah, it's, all the fixed costs, they don't go away.
He wants to see a higher vaccination rate, saying the rollout has been incredibly disappointing and slow. Alan Glenn runs a terrace motel and 10 cottages and said he was preparing for a good September and October.
Just been decimated. And if you looked at the town over the last 4 or 5 weeks, it's just been like a ghost town, and we're not the only people to be hit. The restaurants and all those guys, they've been suffering also.
Even with government support, he says his income isn't covering all of the bills, so he's delving into his savings. Despite this, he remains optimistic that the situation will improve once Aucklanders can travel again.
And if you were listening to that, you can check out Nathan and Tess's piece. We'll put it on our Facebook page and the website. It is 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki na pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, we'll have more on the pensioners' plight, stuck in Australia, staring down their pensions being cut off. Officials at a Northland marina are reviewing COVID protocols for boaties arriving from the Pacific as dozens head home during the cyclone season. Tai Tukurau Border Control has raised concerns that yachts heading to the Bay of Islands could bring the Delta variant with them, and not enough is being done to keep Northland safe. Those running the setup say they've had no issues yet, but they'll be making sure their Delta defences are watertight. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Right in the heart of the Bay of Islands, Opua Marina is the gateway to Aotearoa for boaties. Among them are Tom and Susan Sebring, who arrived nearly 2 years ago, pre-COVID times, as part of a trip from the United States, and they're pretty much stuck.
We leave New Zealand won't let us come back in. And all the other destinations are far away or upwind, and so the usual method of hopping from island to island to go west from here is not available to us.
They are very pleased to be here, but understand fears from some locals that outsiders could bring COVID into the community.
People should be vaccinated, and of course New Zealand's been doing a good job of testing. Right now there's a boat that must have just come in that's on the quarantine dock, and so the quarantine officers take good care of them, put big signs on them, stay away. They could stay on their boat.
Hone Harawira of Tai Tukurau Border Control today raised his concerns on Morning Report about yachties arriving from the Pacific, particularly Fiji, where the Delta outbreak has been so devastating.
Now, we know that these yachties are coming from the deadliest COVID centre in the whole of the Pacific, the deadliest, and they're coming into the heart of the Tai Tukurau.
He says Northland is not the place to be isolating people.
Well, they should have stayed in Fiji and written it out. Or, if they want to come here, go down to Auckland. I say that because Auckland has all of the facilities, all of the hospitals, all of the doctors, all of the control systems to enable them, and security systems as well, to enable those people to be looked after.
Chris Galbraith is the General Manager of Far North Holdings, which runs the Opua Marina where yachts arrive. He says there are strict safety measures in place. Boaties usually take 8 to 10 days to make the journey across the Pacific, with additional quarantine and testing when they get here.
And when they arrive in New Zealand and they arrive at Opua, they access the quarantine facility that's there. It's isolated from land. It's actually a floating attenuator off land. They go straight there, met by officials, and the protocols around clearance and managing the risks associated with any imported concerns are dealt with out there on the water.
He says in pre-COVID years, about 500 yachts would come into the marina. Last year that dropped to 80, with almost all of them returning New Zealanders.
Last season I'm aware of potentially only half a dozen or so boats that were able to access an exemption. This year I suspect there'll be very few.
Galbraith says there have been no issues so far, but he understands the fears, and officials are looking into any ways things could be tightened in the defence against Delta.
We're obviously casting another lens over that again in relation to COVID Delta variants and looking to upgrade those defences, if you like, given the nature of Delta. So we're constantly in that space of making sure that port of entry is as robust as it can be and is to protect our communities.
Officials say any changes which may be needed to protect against Delta will be watertight when the majority of boats begin arriving towards the end of October.
3 of New Zealand's traditional allies have announced a major security partnership, the US, UK and Australia. But New Zealand itself did not get an invite. Opposition parties are asking why New Zealand missed out, but the Prime Minister says it's no surprise. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Five Eyes, just -2, making new strides in the defence arena.
Today we're taking another historic step. The UK, Australia and the US will be joined even more closely together.
Always together, never alone.
But not so for New Zealand, very much alone, watching from the sidelines as its supposed friends bro down.
I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal.
The trilateral partnership dubbed AUKUS is built on a landmark pact, an agreement to share advanced defence technologies. Its first initiative, a nuclear-powered submarine fleet for Australia. The opposition wants to know why New Zealand is not at the table.
Our friends have taken the phone off the hook for us.
Is this going to affect the Five Eyes arrangement? What will it mean for the flow of information into New Zealand services?
New Zealand was not offered an invitation to join the arrangement, but Jacinda Ardern says she would not have expected one, nor would she have accepted.
The anchor of this arrangement are nuclear-powered submarines, and it will be very clear to all New Zealanders and to Australia why New Zealand would not wish to be a part of that project.
And she pushes back on any suggestion the deal could hurt New Zealand's ties.
It does not change our existing relationships, including Five Eyes, or our close partnership with Australia on defence matters.
2 former defence ministers concur, Wayne Mapp and Jonathan Coleman, both from the National Party. Neither surprised nor particularly concerned by New Zealand's absence.
Well, we haven't been in ANZUS for 30 years, for heaven's sakes. So we're hardly being sidelined. We were sidelined 30 years ago.
I'm not sure that New Zealand's involvement would even have been considered, quite frankly.
And Robert Patman, Professor of International Relations at Otago University, says there are good reasons for New Zealand to maintain its independence.
I'm not quite sure when people say we're sidelined by this, would they be comfortable to be included in it? I mean, it has some big implications. Actually, a lot of Kiwis would be very unhappy if we were part of an arrangement where we were seen to be siding with powers which are actually outside the Indo-Pacific region.
Even absent from the arrangement, New Zealand will see its consequences in the region as the Western nations seek to counter China's growing influence.
MIQ is doing a roaring trade at the moment, but it's not the kind you might think. Auckland Zoo's 3 new lions are currently quarantining after coming here from Australia. Twin sisters Aziza and Kabibi and their half-sister Ilola have arrived about 5 months after the zoo was forced to put down 2 elderly lions because of health issues. Warren Spencer is Auckland Zoo's Senior Curator of Mammals and joins us now. Warren, what can you tell us about your new guests?
Kia ora, Lisa. My new guests, they're going great. They're busy reorganising their habitats and their furniture, and they're really settling in quite nicely.
What kind of furniture do lions have?
Well, they have a bed, and they have all sorts of enriching and stimulating furniture.
So how do lions quarantine, and where are they, like, specifically?
Well, I can walk you through the transport. It takes many, many months of pre-planning and preparation. It involves CITES permits, import-exports permits, and a whole host of other documentation. There's health testing, there's pre-planning, there's contingency planning, and the transport itself takes 3 legs. You've got the leg, which is the road transport from the zoo to the airport in Australia. Then you've got the air transport to Auckland. Once they arrive and they're cleared and they're checked on all their documents are checked. We send a team there to bring them back to the zoo. We get them back to the zoo as quickly as possible, out of their crates and into their indoor facilities, and then they start to acquaint themselves to their new home. It's a real challenging, complex operation doing international transport. You sometimes wonder if you're ever going to get the thing completed, but when you get them here and you meet them for the first time, you realise it's all been worthwhile.
So is it a good time to be introducing them to the zoo? I mean, Auckland's in lockdown at the moment, so I imagine, it's a lot quieter than it normally would be. Is that an advantage at the moment?
I don't think it's an advantage, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, our operations continue just whether we've got visitors here or not. And of course, we miss our visitors and we're looking forward to welcoming them back, but it doesn't make that much of a difference for the lion. They'll be going through their quarantine for the next 30 days. So we'll be monitoring them closely and they'll be prepared and getting out into their habitat, and hopefully visitors will see them when that happens.
So 30 days quarantine, I mean, what are you looking for? Are they tested in some way to make sure they're not carrying anything?
Well, there's a whole range of tests in Australia as well. So either side of the Tasman, colleagues in Australia will be doing a 30-day quarantine period, and they'll be doing a whole range of tests. And when they come here, they'll again, and this is in conjunction with MPI verification vets and our veterinary team here, we'll be doing a number of tests, and then we'll make sure that they're free from any issues, any niggles, any problems, any challenges or worries, and then we'll be free to let them out into their habitat, knowing full well that they're fit and well and healthy.
So this, international exchange, if we can call it that, is part of the zoo breeding and preservation program. So you've got 3 girls. Are you actually planning to breed with these lions?
Possibly in the future. What we do is, working with an international breeding program, we look at the genetic diversity and the demographics of a population so we can maintain it sustainably. And it could very well be that we'll have 1 or 2 or all of these females breeding in the future, but we work with our colleagues who are coordinating the program to establish that. So that's something we'll be talking about in the future.
So how are the animals going at the zoo at the moment with no visitors? And have you got any other new arrivals?
No other new arrivals, but the animals are doing really well. I mean, they're doing as well as they would be with visitors here. Life goes on. They're really having a very stimulating and excellent time at the zoo, and the keepers are working very hard to stimulate and enrich them, as they usually do. So, and it's nice to walk around and see them. They don't tend to react too differently. They might be moving around slightly differently, but they're generally all fine and happy with or without our visitors.
Thank you for your time, Warren. That's Warren Spencer, who's Auckland Zoo's Senior Curator of Mammals. 3 sisters lions that they have got from Australia there. A Northland farmer grappling with feral dogs attacking her stock has managed to catch one and fit it with a GPS collar. The issue came to a head in July when more than 100 stock were killed on a sheep and beef farm just south of Cape Reinga. Efforts by hunters to control the feral dogs were unsuccessful, and the attacks have continued with 26 sheep mauled just a couple of days ago. Despite this, farm owner Anne-Marie Nilsson says progress has been made.
We did live capture a dog. She did go to the vet where she was spayed, because obviously we can't release a dog that might make more. Microchipped and vaccinated for parvo, and she's come back and has her recovery time. And today we are putting a tracking collar on her and a VHF tracking device. So just in case the camera fails, the collar fails, we've got a secondary backup to find her. And our plan is to release her in an area near to where the dogs got in and mauled the sheep a few days ago, hoping that she'll mate up with that pack and then we'll be able to track them.
Ms Nilsson says they've named the dog Judy and they hope she will lead them to other dogs.
Well, the first thing we're trying to do is learn more about them. So if we can establish she's joined up with a pack, which is highly likely, she's a young dog and a female, so there's no reason why they wouldn't accept her. We can then track their activities, where they go, where their home patch is, how far they travel, whether they're in the dock conservancy or in the forest or out on the beach. So that's our first thing, is to learn as much as we can. Secondary will be hopefully being able to track them down and maybe euthanise some of them. But thirdly, probably one of the most important things is if she hooks up with a pack and we can track her, well, then we can see if they're coming onto a property and the likelihood of going to attack some animals.
And Anne-Marie Nelson says the mission is being supported by the Northland Regional Council and the Department of Conservation. Let's get to your feedback before the news at 6. A lot of you getting in touch about the pensioners stranded in Australia. This person says, why do you think thousands of superannuitants did not go to Oz? We heard Jacinda tell us, flyer beware, and we knew the rules if we were overseas. Heaven knows we've had COVID for long enough. These are adults, not children. However, another listener says, as a human and a gerontology nurse, I am appalled that our elders stuck in Australia due to COVID face the loss of their pensions. Also unimpressed by Dr. Verrall's apparent lack of knowledge. Another person says, they knowingly took a risk. Now they want the rest of us to pay. Just for the record, I'm over 65 and left England in 1958. Long-haul air flights are simply irresponsible in this world unless there are very good reasons for it. Another person, TJ from Hamilton, says the government's manufacturing unnecessary work for itself in the pensioners' case. They should just extend the period you can be away from New Zealand. I'm sure the government's got better things to do. And this one, just pay the pension for goodness sake, 3 exclamation marks. Or 3 ministers, 50 officials and dozens of families will spend thousands of hours trying to get them home. Efficiency tells me to just continue their pensions. And this one in as well. Hi Lisa, is it just me or does nobody in the government ever tell Associate Minister Verrall anything? And another listener says it was flyer beware. When the borders were closing, they were told to get on flights, and if they didn't, then they would be reliant on MIQ, which it was clear was oversubscribed at that stage. They should have been aware that this could have happened. So, pretty split views there. On the subject of the truck driver, this is the person who has tested positive for COVID and has been to Hamilton, Cambridge and Tauranga, I think it was. Alistair from Dunedin says if only he had his own test kit, rapid test kit.
Ahi Marie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. 3 agencies have launched a coordinated investigation of the events preceding the Lynn Mall stabbings. The way Ahmed Samsudeen was managed in custody and in the 7 weeks leading up to the attack will be examined by the Independent Police Conduct Authority, the Office of the Inspectorate at the Department of Corrections and the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security. The review will investigate if the police, corrections and the Security Intelligence Service did enough to assess the risk that Samsudeen posed and if they did enough to respond to that risk. A separate review is already underway into his shooting. The coordinated review is due for completion next March. Police searching for a King Country man missing with his 3 young children are also investigating the family's background. Thomas Phillips and the children were last seen by family at Marukopa on Saturday evening. Andrew McRae reports.
Detectives are running an investigation parallel to the search, checking bank and phone records, as well as speaking with family and friends. Inspector Will Loughran says working on the family's movements and spending helps to build a clear profile of the family. He says this helps with possible locations they could be. Inspector Loughran says police are exploring all avenues and at this stage there's no indication of foul play. The search has been expanded to cover the King Country west coast from Taharoa in the north to about 15 nautical miles south of Marukopa.
Contact tracers have finished interviewing a truck driver with COVID-19 who crossed the Auckland border. The driver, who delivers supermarket supplies, drove to Cambridge, Hamilton and Tauranga before testing positive. The government's COVID-19 spokesperson, Dr. Ayesha Verrall, told Checkpoint it is important to find out when the driver knew they were a close contact of another case in Auckland.
That is precisely the sort of information we'll get as the investigation is concluded.
There were 13 new cases today, bringing the outbreak total to 996. There's also a mystery case, a patient at Middlemore Hospital's emergency department who showed no symptoms but was swabbed as part of surveillance testing. The first mobile buses delivering vaccinations to Aucklanders began work today. They have been at Pukekohe, Papakura and Henderson after a launch and a blessing this morning. Eventually 12 buses will run across the city. The city's district health boards say at level 3 and 4 the vaccinations will happen outside the buses in places like supermarket car parks to allow for distancing. But as the alert levels drop, they will go down residential streets. Aucklanders are being urged to get vaccinated in what is hoped to be the final week of level 4, with many spaces at walk-in and drive-through clinics. The Prime Minister says the Defence and Security Pact between the United States, Britain and Australia will have no bearing on New Zealand's relationships. The three countries say the agreement will be vital to defending their shared interests in the Indo-Pacific region, where they have concerns about China's growing military presence. Jacinda Ardern says it won't affect New Zealand's existing strong alliances.
This is not a treaty-level arrangement. It does not change our existing relationships, including Five Eyes, or our close partnership with Australia on defence matters.
Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand wasn't approached about a potential role, which isn't surprising given its well-known views on nuclear-powered vessels and weapons. Police have confirmed a homicide victim whose body was found in the Auckland suburb of Manurewa was a teenage girl. The 16-year-old was found dead on a property in McVilly Road on Saturday afternoon. Sam Ollie reports.
In a statement this afternoon, Police Detective Senior Sergeant Mike Hayward said the girl's family was devastated and struggling to come to terms with her death. They have made a request to the coroner's office to keep her name suppressed for now. Sergeant Hayward says the county's Manukau community will no doubt be shocked by the victim's young age. Police are analysing CCTV footage as part of their investigation called Operation Casting.
Businesses are helping each other through a not-for-profit voucher scheme designed to help small enterprises stay afloat through lockdown. SOS Business was set up online when the country first went into lockdown last year and allows customers to buy vouchers that could be used later, meaning businesses get much-needed cash flow. It was handed over to an American investor last year. SOS founder David Downs says businesses of all sizes are supporting each other by purchasing vouchers, including an electrician who bought vouchers as a thank you to customers. Moving now into sports news, 4 Auckland-based Silver Ferns have now been granted a government exemption to travel to Christchurch for next week's netball series against England. Captain Gina Crampton, Vice-Captain Sulu Fitzpatrick, Peta Toiava and Grayson Wiki will join the rest of the squad ahead of Monday's opening game. Netball New Zealand say the dispensation was based on a Ministry of Health assessment of public health risk and economic impact. The All Blacks have made 11 changes to the starting side for Saturday's second test against Argentina, with Damien McKenzie set to get just his second start at first 5. Coach Ian Foster says he is confident McKenzie can handle the role in Brisbane, despite having not started a test there in 3 years.
No, he hasn't, but he's trained a lot there. He has filled in at times. He's clearly started there before. He played 35 minutes last week. It's a vote of confidence that we think he's really progressing in that position.
Cork has seemingly ruled itself out of contention for hosting the America's Cup, saying it needs another 6 months to carry out due diligence on the viability of hosting the event. Team New Zealand are due to announce the next host city tomorrow, with Spain, Jeddah in Saudi Arabia and Auckland the other options. And finally, after going down 2-1 in the T20 series against England, the White Ferns are hoping to turn things around in their one-day series, which starts tonight in Bristol. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Yard no Soul has some top waiata lined up for a Te Wiki o Te Rero Māori pocket edition of Music 101. Claire Kincannon follows the flight of the kaka, making a comeback in the hills north of Ōtepoti. And Aaron Warren seeking out the science behind the 1930s fiction of John W. Campbell, who imagined spacecraft made from solid light. Sort of knocks the particle wave thing on its head, doesn't it? On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato and Coromandel Peninsula. Showers, some heavy with thunderstorms clearing around midday tomorrow. Downpours possible for Auckland and Waikato tonight. Waitomo to Manawatu, including the Central High Country and Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, possibly becoming heavy, clearing late tomorrow morning. Thunderstorms possible about the Western Bay of Plenty tonight. Strong or gale southeasterlies easing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay will see rain with heavy falls easing late tomorrow. Strong or gale southeasterlies tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa will see rain, possibly heavy for Wairarapa, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Southeast gales also easing tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland will be fine with a few showers in Fiordland, Buller and the Marlborough Sounds. Southeast gales about the Sounds easing later tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland will have occasional showers, clearing later tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Sarah. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. A pensioner stranded in Queensland with serious health issues is struggling to pay for her medication and is desperate to get home to Hokianga before her super is cut off. Last night, Checkpoint brought you stories of a bunch of superannuitants who could get their pensions suspended if they're out of the country for more than 6 months after getting stuck in Australia when the travel bubble burst. Janie Mackey lives on the Gold Coast with her husband and 3 kids, and for a whole lot of reasons that she'll explain, she needed some help. So when the bubble opened, her mum Catherine headed over. Catherine has health problems, cancer and chronic lung disease, but her daughter needed her. About a week after she arrived, the bubble burst. Here's her daughter Janie.
My husband and I and my 3 children, we've been here for almost 11 years, and basically we don't have any family, any support, and I have a special needs son, so that also adds, quite difficulty at the best of times. So, it was just a matter of, I hadn't seen mum in over 18 months, and, I was struggling a bit with, my mental health and stuff like that. So, once those green flights were opened up, mum jumped on board. So that was the main reason. And
Janie, I don't want to pry, but can you tell us a little bit about when you say you were struggling with your mental health a bit, what do you mean?
Sorry, I'm getting quite emotional, but yeah.
Just take your time.
I've struggled a few years with depression and anxiety, and, the last 3 years have been really tough. So I lost my dad 3 years ago. And, just with the whole COVID situation, not being able to have, that connection with family, it's been very, very difficult.
Yeah, and you've got a lot on your plate and looking after your son without family support. So when mum headed over, you would have been feeling pretty good about that.
Oh, look, we were over the moon. I mean, and just in the time that mum's been here, we've just noticed a big difference in my son. Just he's non-verbal, but he's just trying so hard to talk now. So, it's just amazing having mum here.
Your mother, who has had cancer and other health problems, is on medication. So what happens with her drugs while she's there in Australia? Are you having to pay for that?
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. It's just been a nightmare after a nightmare. So basically, mum came equipped with 3 to 4 months supply because that was her intention of only staying here till early September. However, there was also mishaps with one of her tablets. The pharmacy, for some reason, only dispensed a month's worth supply. So obviously, mum being 70, she had no idea. She just entrusted that, she was given the right amount of medication. So basically, when she realised, she was running out of tablets, I booked her into our GP, and obviously not being under our Medicare system, It's just been horrendous. So just for a prescription, Mum was charged $60 just for one of her inhalers for her COPD. So it's not like a Ventolin, like a normal Ventolin inhaler, it's specifically for her lung disease. That's $86. And then we've since found out that one of her other tablets, they don't actually dispense in Australia. So, you know, Mum's now panicking because she's probably only got a month or so left of this particular medication that the doctor said they don't actually have that available. So, you know, Mum is stressing out big time.
Janie, how would you describe how the family is sort of feeling and coping at the moment?
Oh, look, it's, you know, we just can't believe that we're in this situation. Like, you know, with the travel bubble being opened, it was like a sigh of relief. You know, and I know, you know, I've heard, you know, ministers speak of, you know, there's always a risk of travelling during the pandemic, but, you know, who would have expected, you know, after so long the green flights opening that, you know, within a week it was just the borders were shut. So, you know, it's just been, you know, Mum's just so stressed out. I mean, I wake up every morning and I can tell she's been crying. It's just the uncertainty of not knowing if and when, you know, Mum will be able to get home. The other issue that we have is, you know, she contacted Ministry of Social Services just to inquire about, you know, the 26-week cut-off for her pension. And then she was basically told that if she is outside for longer than 26 weeks, her pension would be cut. So, as you can imagine, Mum was so distraught. She just broke down on the phone.
Can I ask you if you could just wander around the house and find Catherine? And are you able to just hand the phone to Catherine?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora, Lisa.
Kia ora, Catherine. How worried are you, Catherine, about your situation at the moment?
Oh, I'm very worried. Very worried. I'm very emotional.
Tell me what you think of the fact that you can't get home at the moment, and where does that leave you?
Leaves me in limbo, and I'm devastated. I can't get home. Absolutely devastated.
And your pension, Catherine? What happens if that is cut?
Well, I've got nothing. Absolutely nothing. Oh, thank you so much for listening to our story. I'll give it back to Jamie.
Thank you, Catherine.
You darling.
Hi, Lisa. I'm just so disappointed. Yeah, it's just so unfair. I mean, you know, it's out of Mum's control. You know, it's not like she's choosing to stay here.
And that was Janie Mackey. And if you're wondering, her mother Catherine couldn't get one on one of those immediate flights back after the bubble burst because she'd developed cold and flu-like symptoms that weren't COVID, but they did prevent her from flying. Social Development and Employment Minister Carmel Sepuloni declined an interview on this subject, but in a statement said there is some scope available to extend New Zealand superannuation for people who are overseas. This is considered on a case-by-case basis and is not an exemption. Now, in news just to hand, the Ministry of Health has put out a press statement regarding the truck driver who has been confirmed to have COVID. They say they've completed an initial interview with the truck driver who returned a positive test today, and the case has been linked to the existing outbreak. A small number of exposure vents are in the process of being worked through by public health staff, they say. Any that are locations of interest will be listed on the Ministry of Health website. And we anticipate the first of a handful of Auckland locations expected to be supermarkets and dairies to be published this evening. where we can readily identify contacts, these exposure events will not be listed. So basically, make sure you go onto the Places of Interest website. In regards to the Middlemore patient, this is basically a mystery case. So the patient who tested positive at Middlemore on Wednesday evening has also been interviewed, is in isolation at home awaiting transfer to MIQ, says the Ministry of Health. The individual is in a household where no other cases have been identified at this stage. All household members are in isolation, and the Ministry says it continues to look for links to other cases. The other 5 previous cases identified through exposure events at Middlemore have all been linked to the outbreak on further investigation. And just looking at the locations of interest as it's been updated, there appears to be a couple of new service stations listed. Z Bombay on Great South Road, and also Z Te Irarangi Drive, Clover Park, and another couple of locations there. So the best advice is to go onto the website, check out the new locations of interest that have gone up. Some families impacted by this latest Delta outbreak have been given the all clear to leave quarantine. They're being supported by Pacifica groups with temporary housing, bridging a gap before they head home because others in their households are self-isolating. 4 families came out of quarantine today, and our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi caught up with them.
For Patricia Tosaga and her family of 7, quarantine was a stressful time.
We all got our positive tests at different times. So we were all, some of us were in the same hotel but different rooms, and then some of us were at a completely different MIQ facility. And I had 2 boys with me, and it was just me. So it was a bit of a challenge, but thankfully they didn't have any symptoms.
Just one family member attended a church service in Mangere, but all of them got COVID. They became part of the Assemblies of God cluster. Today they told us they're just thankful to be out the other side.
It was a bit scary, but just finally being able to come out now and just kind of get things back to, slowly back to normal.
Now they've got a temporary 3-bedroom home, which they say is their saving grace.
Well, we've been waiting on housing for a while because the current house that we were living in was a bit overcrowded. It was just a small 3-bedroom with 7 of us. So if you can imagine, there was 4 of us in 1 bedroom with 2 kids as well. It's not great. So this is definitely just a step closer to getting into suitable housing for the whole 7 of us as well. So yeah, it's definitely a blessing in disguise, especially after what we went through as a whole family.
They can stay up to 4 months if they need to. Chief Executive of Penina Health Trust, Roine Leala Ialoto, says they knew they urgently needed to do something when COVID reared its head.
We knew that if COVID hit our communities, it would hit it hard because we've got big families, and therefore we need solutions that can help rise to those challenges. And that's why we held these houses back, and we worked with Housing and Urban Development to allow us to hold these houses back.
Many Pacifica who caught COVID-19 were essential workers or unable to work because they were in isolation. Spending a long time in MIQ with extended family has had a big effect on mental health. But health assessments and social services are on offer to help them reintegrate back into the community. Minister for Pacific Peoples, or Pito Williams-Seo, says this approach is what works for their community.
Consortiums of a number of Pacific providers, they are able to work together, bring that wraparound support, and the role of government is to enable that and to resource that. And obviously, this is an area, as I've said, it's our frontline border, and will continue to be our frontline border until such time as this virus miraculously disappears.
Rebecca Tuliafua is the wife of church leader Reverend Tuliafua. They've been dealing with the largest COVID cluster to date, and she says this temporary housing is a huge relief.
Our church community can breathe, coming out of MIQ, can breathe better.
As New Zealand's only Pacific community housing provider, the Penina Trust has received Ministry of Health funding for 7 homes and can scale up to provide 20.
It is 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Locals in a small rural district in Hawke's Bay are worried a proposed large housing development will destroy their beloved landscape forever. A couple wants to build more than 300 homes near the tiny towns of Tikokino and Onga in central Hawke's Bay. But not everyone is happy. Ane te kai reporter Tom Kitchen I te mato a Maui. Tom Kitchen reports from Hawke's Bay.
I'm standing by a large field on a misty, damp spring morning in central Hawke's Bay, a small rural district south of Napier and Hastings. Farmland stretches as far as the eye can see, as the occasional car zooms by and birdsong is heard among the trees. But if a proposal to build about 300 homes here gets a green light, this could change the face of the district. Onga is a tiny town just a few minutes' drive from the space, home to give or take 150 people. I asked some locals what they think of this subdivision proposal.
I think it must be a shandy town of shambles. I think the local council and regional council, whoever's at the top, should stop it.
That's Andy Gunson, a third-generation Onga farmer. He's lived his whole life in the small community.
New Zealand has grown, don't get me wrong, but we've already got areas set up for that now. You know, as it mentioned, Napier, Hastings, Waipawa, here in Onga, Tikokino up the road. You know, there's enough infrastructure around for people to go and buy houses or sections where it is already, without that there happening.
Kushla Isaacson agrees.
To me, it wouldn't be an asset, and to me, it's not lifestyle blocks. It would be another town.
I meet Central Hawke's Bay Mayor Alex Walker in the district's biggest town, Waipukoro, about 15 minutes drive away from the proposed subdivision. Mayor Walker and I meet at a part of the town where there's heaps of new building going on. She says there's a huge housing need, as growth's much faster than the council's boldest predictions.
This is a level of growth that we have not seen in Central Hawke's Bay since probably mid-last century, the 50s and 60s, the rate of housing growth. And 3 years ago we looked at projections for growth in the district that said we'd probably be looking at 1,000 new houses over the space of 10 years. Well, we're about to hit that only 3 years in.
She's all for new development that enhances what she calls a thriving Central Hawke's Bay.
We've got a number of small towns across Central Hawke's Bay who all have their little bit of character, and they're just that little bit of different lifestyle living, and we need to be nurturing that and building on what we've got rather than creating anything new.
In saying that, here's your opinion on the proposed 300-ish home development.
My view is that the development doesn't fit with what I see as my vision of a thriving Central Hawke's Bay. But in saying that, we have had some successful rural lifestyle developments like on River Road in Patongata, where people are enjoying living a rural lifestyle in Central Hawke's Bay. So it can be done well, and it can be done in a sensitive way. So it could work out.
There's also the fact that under a newly proposed district plan, the development wouldn't be able to go ahead in favour of protecting fertile soils. But the developers applied early, before the district plan may change, so these new rules won't apply to them. Developer Sandra Elmers has been farming the area for several years. She says there's a big housing shortage.
Well, I think you need to only need to open any newspaper or to switch on any media, and you'll soon see that there's a dire housing shortage right over New Zealand, pretty much, from one end to the other.
In a message to the naysayers, she's happy to talk through any concerns.
I think most people are nervous about anything new, primarily because they don't really understand what's happening. They've had a look at the plan and they've thought, they're all jammed in like sardines, and all those people living on top of one another, when it couldn't be further from that.
The section sizes range from about an acre to over a hectare. The subdivision's application process is currently before the Central Hawke's Bay District Council. Mayor Walker says public consultation could be on the cards if required by law.
A former Islamic State bride says she wants to improve her innocence in court and says she can help the UK fight terror. Shamima Begum left the UK as a teenager to join ISIS, but denies she played an active role in the armed group. Now the 22-year-old says she can help her country. The BBC's Daniel Sanford reports.
In February 2019, Shamima Begum emerged from the collapse of the Islamic State group's brutal rule in Syria wearing a long black dress and veil with only her face uncovered. She told BBC News that weekend that she could see justification for the Manchester Arena bombing as retaliation for the deaths of children in IS territory. For her latest BBC interview at a camp in Kurdish-held territory, she wore pink nail varnish, a loose denim shirt with her hair down and sunglasses perched on her head, and she asked for forgiveness for joining Islamic State.
ISIS ruined people's lives. ISIS ruined my life, my family's life, and I will have to live with that.
I mean, when you think back to being part of a group that did commit genocide, that did murder, that did carry out attacks around the world, how does that feel?
It makes me sick to my stomach, really. It makes me hate myself.
Shamima Begum had left her home in East London aged 15 with 2 school friends. They travelled through Turkey to Syria and married Islamic State fighters. At the time, IS were beheading hostages and throwing gay men from high buildings. She was stripped of her UK citizenship because of intelligence about what she'd done during her time with IS. But now she says she wants to help to stop other girls being groomed by extremists.
I could advise people who work in counterterrorism the tactics that groups like ISIS use to persuade people to come here, and ways to speak to people who may be potentially radicalised, and ways to speak to them to persuade them not to go and to not be radical.
She's still fighting to have her British citizenship returned, but Sajid Javid, who deprived her of it when he was Home Secretary, said today of the secret intelligence about her that he saw at the time, "If you knew what I knew, you would have made exactly the same decision."
4 amateur astronauts have reached orbit after blasting off from Florida. It's the first space mission with no professional crew on board, all paid for by a billionaire who will also be on board. The BBC's Rebecca Verrall has more.
Since the earliest launches, fewer than 600 people have made the journey into space. And most were military-trained personnel. The mission has been paid for by billionaire businessman Jared Isaacman. He says the aim is to raise money for charity, so he's given 3 other seats on the SpaceX capsule to people with inspirational stories. Cyan Proctor is a geoscientist who once came close to being selected as a NASA astronaut. And Hayley Arsenault overcame bone cancer as a child and now works for the hospital that treated her.
I remember getting off the phone and my hands were shaking. It was just so exhilarating. This is definitely not something I ever imagined would happen, but I think that's what it makes it so fun for me.
The team has had just 6 months of training, but computers will do most of the work during the flight. None of the crew, though, have been in space before, and no professional astronauts will be joining them on board.
You've got these 4 people who will be in a very hostile environment of space, trusting their lives on the technology, on the automation, and on the knowledge of people in mission control.
The price of the mission hasn't been disclosed, but it's likely to be tens of millions of dollars. For now, flights like these remain the preserve of the super rich, even if they take a few people along for the ride.
That's all from us. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō, and from 5 a.m. tomorrow, First Up is joined by Dr. Amjad Adaljar from Johns Hopkins University and epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker. Now, they will debate whether eliminating COVID-19 is our best long-term strategy or whether we need to live with the virus. That is going to be an interesting one. Don't miss it from 5 a.m. tomorrow. Kia pai tōpō.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Contact tracers are trying to determine when a COVID-19 positive truck driver knew they were a close contact of another Auckland case. Aucklanders are being urged to get vaccinated in what is hoped to be the final week of level 4, with many spaces at drop-in centres available. Police are regularly reassessing the search for a King Country man and his 3 children, but at this stage it is continuing with the grid expanded. And County's Manukau Police suspect the community will be shocked a Manurewa homicide victim is a 16-year-old girl. Those are your